Experts find something strange in a Civil War-era family photo. But what they find next left them completely stunned. It's a detail no one noticed for over a century. Wait, who took this photo, and why is it not listed in any Civil War archive? Dr. Fiona Riles leaned in, squinting through the magnifier. Her eyes were locked on the strange Civil War-era family photograph now resting on her workbench. It had arrived 2 weeks earlier, unexpectedly, in a padded envelope marked from a retired antiques dealer in Richmond. The note inside was short, scrawled in an unsteady hand. Found this in my grandfather's attic, might be worth something, belonged to someone named Hargrove. The photo itself was a glass plate negative, well preserved, surprisingly intact. The scene it captured was intimate, but unnerving. At the center sat a Union soldier, upright in uniform, boots polished, posture too deliberate to be casual. On his right, a woman in a vivid red plaid dress, her arms folded neatly across her lap. Her face was unsmiling, almost stiff. Seated on the man's lap was a child, no older than 4. The boy's posture was rigid, his hands folded in front of him, and like the adults, his gaze pointed directly at the lens. They looked like a family, but something about them felt off. Fiona had seen hundreds of Civil War portraits in her career, families posing in their Sunday best, soldiers immortalized in fading sepia before going off to war. But this image had too much tension, too much stillness. The distance between their bodies was formal, not familial. The warmth was missing. She called in her team. Nolan Tran, her digital archivist and AI scanning specialist. Clara Voss, a young historian with a sharp eye for irregular patterns in data. And Professor Ed Hargreaves, a seasoned Civil War genealogist who had consulted on several National Archives projects. Look at the stitching, Fiona pointed. The uniform's regulation correct. Insignia suggests cavalry, but there's no matching Hargrove listed under any cavalry unit between 1862 and 1864. Not in Virginia, not in Pennsylvania, not anywhere. They agreed to begin digitizing the plate. Nolan would run it through their facial recognition system, while Clara would dig into family records and land deeds tied to the name Hargrove. Ed would handle military registries. It was a routine process, until it wasn't. As Fiona gently lowered the plate into the scanner, she whispered mostly to herself, "If this is just a family photo, then why does it feel like a staged confession?" By the 3rd day of scanning, the unease had only deepened. Nolan had carefully enhanced the image layer by layer. Using spectral filtering, he isolated details invisible to the naked eye. Creases in the soldier's lapel, subtle folds in the boy's sleeve, and most notably, a faint line beneath the woman's wrist, where a second object had once rested before being cropped out or removed. Meanwhile, Clara sat at a long oak desk, combing through digitized microfiche and local census logs. The name Samuel T. Hargrove popped up just once, in a property deed filed in 1862 for a 17-acre plot west of Roanoke, Virginia. No marriage certificate, no record of a birth, no tax filing afterward. It was as if the family existed only to be photographed. "I've cross-referenced every Union cavalry roster from 1861 to 1865, Ed said, tapping his clipboard. Not one Hargrove with the initials ST, not even a variant spelling. Either he changed his name, or he never served at all. Fiona frowned, now perched beside Nolan's monitor. But that uniform is real. He had to get it from somewhere. Or someone, Clara added. Then Nolan called them over. "Check this," he said, pointing at the screen. "I ran the soldier's face through our AI match engine. The closest hit is a Daniel Reed, died 1863, executed for espionage. But there's no known photo on file, just a sketch from a tribunal hearing and a prison record." Fiona's mouth tightened. What if Reed didn't die in 1863? And what if he became Hargrove? Ed finished. The timeline started to wobble. If this man really was Daniel Reed, it would explain the lack of records, the absence from troop rosters. Reed had been accused of leaking Union supply movements to Confederate scouts. His case was murky. Records missing, verdict controversial. But his alias, if real, might have been Hargrove. Clara pulled up local newspaper clippings. One caught her attention. April 1865. Widow Harrow goes missing with son left behind. Not Hargrove. Harrow. And this gets worse, she added. This article says the woman disappeared with a man wanted for military betrayal, but never names him. It couldn't be a coincidence. 3 people, 1 photo, 1 name that didn't belong to any of them. But the next clue came from what Nolan found, not inside the photo itself, but taped carefully behind the thick wooden back of the original walnut frame. No one had noticed it earlier. The frame had been stored separately, overlooked. Carefully hidden beneath a layer of brittle paperboard was an envelope. Yellowed with age, its seal long since crumbled. Fiona used tweezers and cotton gloves to gently remove and open it. Inside was a single folded sheet of stationery. The ink faded but legible. Dated April 1864, it was signed by someone named Lydia Hargrove, presumably the woman in the photo. The letter wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. It read like a journal entry, one not meant to be seen. They told me not to let anyone see it, but Samuel insisted, said it would prove his loyalty. But it wasn't loyalty. He looked too long, too hard. The man in the lens wasn't Daniel Reed, not anymore. And I fear he sees through the boy. The entire team stood frozen after Fiona finished reading it aloud. Clara was the first to break the silence. Did she just call him Daniel Reed? Fiona nodded, slowly laying the paper beside the frame. She knew. At least on some level, she knew who he really was. Nolan turned the image on screen and zoomed in again on the man's face. So, we're not dealing with a family. We're looking at a war criminal, hiding behind one. Clara, meanwhile, dove back into the archives. Using Lydia's possible maiden name, Harrow, she searched birth records in Virginia and found something startling. A child named Elias Harrow, born 1859, recorded as an orphan by 1865. There's no father listed, she said, voice tightening. But there's a note from the orphanage. Brought by a woman claiming name was Hargrove, requested no contact, left at the gate after dusk. Child spoke only once, said, "He told me not to move." The man in the portrait, whether Hargrove or Reed, had not only used the name, but had possibly used the boy as cover. Lydia had fled, changed names, and vanished, leaving behind a traumatized child. Living a lie next to an alleged war criminal must have destroyed her soul. Ed muttered, "This photo might be the only documented proof that Daniel Reed escaped execution. And the boy," Fiona whispered, "could have been taken, or worse, used." They all stared back at the solemn portrait. What once seemed like a formal wartime keepsake was now unraveling as something far more unsettling. For all the historical horrors Fiona's team had uncovered before, this felt different. It felt personal. Using ultraviolet contrast and heat mapping software, Nolan was able to enhance the image further. And that's when he noticed something almost invisible. A faint loop beneath the child's right wrist, hidden under the sleeve. A thread. No. Possibly a binding. "I think his hands were tied," Nolan said, pausing the enhancement. "It's subtle, but look at the way the sleeve bunches. It's not natural." Fiona leaned in. "That's restraint posture. He's not sitting still because he's told to behave. He's sitting still because he's being made to." Clara exhaled slowly. The photo now looked less like a family snapshot and more like a statement, an attempt to portray unity, maybe even innocence. But beneath the layers, every detail told a different story. Ed followed up with a lead he had been chasing since the Lydia Harrow discovery. He found tribunal records of Reed's final military interview before his supposed execution. But one detail caught his eye. The court's own stenographer had inserted a side note. Subject's tone during final plea was rehearsed. Several mentions of a woman and child who were not present. Possible manipulative narrative. The phrase, "not present," repeated like an echo. So he was already crafting this identity, Ed said. He wanted people to think he had a wife and child, to soften his image, to humanize himself. But Lydia never registered a marriage. And the child, Elias Harrow, shows up later in an orphanage. Alone, Clara added. Which led to one haunting possibility: they were being used. Had Daniel charmed Lydia to convince her to take part in his manipulation, or had he forced her? Either way, she had seen through his lies eventually and fled. Nolan, deep in the scan, now spotted something else. On the soldier's left side, barely visible behind the boy's head, the uniform had a torn seam. Nestled inside, digitally enhanced, was a folded piece of paper. Clara stabilized the frame and zoomed in. It was a Union-issued topographical scout map, highly restricted during the war. The man had no clearance for that, and definitely no reason to be holding military intelligence in a family portrait. Fiona stepped back and stared again at the image. 3 people, one dressed to deceive, one forced to pose, and one too young to understand the weight of the moment. And still, one piece didn't fit. What was Reed's second plan when he arranged for this image to be taken? The answer didn't come from the photograph. It came from a letter, misfiled, buried in a military archive box labeled Field Discipline, 1863-64, found by accident while Ed cross-referenced Daniel Reed's name under possible aliases. Inside that folder was a short disciplinary report, dated August 12, 1863. It described an unregistered scout attempting to enter a Union dispatch post near Staunton, Virginia. The scout, when questioned, produced falsified identification under the name Samuel Hargrove. When his pack was searched, they found 2 items: a topographical map marked with altered supply routes, and a photographic plate wrapped in linen. The report stated, subject claimed the photo was proof of his loyalty, proof he had a family, a child, that he was not a threat. But upon deeper inspection, his identity unraveled. The woman refused to speak. The child never answered to the name given. Fiona read the entire page aloud in silence. Then she read it again. The photo had been presented as part of a con, a propriedade. Lydia had probably fled after realizing that Daniel had been using her and little Elias as an alibi. That's when Nolan checked the physical plate's side. Etched faintly in tiny script was a number, H23-D4. He ran it through the Smithsonian's registry. The match shocked them all. The photographer was not a military artist. He was a civilian portraitist from Richmond, whose name came up briefly in connection to known cases of identity forgery during the war. He had been arrested in 1865 for falsifying military documents and producing propaganda-grade imagery for deserters and drifters. Had the photographer connected Daniel with Lydia and Elias? Had he told her that she would be used to corroborate a fake identity? Or had he forced her to play house with a man determined to betray the country with threats on Elias's life? This the experts would never know. What they did know was that this photo wasn't a captured memory. It was a fabricated truth. And Lydia? They found no marriage to Reed, but they did find a church document from 1870 listing Lydia Harrow as a teacher at a girls' boarding home in Staunton. Next to her name, guardian of Elias H. She had likely been forced to pretend she was Daniel's wife for years, but then she had found the strength to escape and had dropped Elias off at the orphanage to make sure Daniel would never put his hands on him again if he found her. That choice sounded heartless, but likely saved both their lives in the long run. Lydia disappeared. Reed was caught soon after the failed infiltration attempt. Court records confirmed he never went to trial. He disappeared from custody, likely escaping under a new alias. But the photograph, despite its lie, preserved something real: a woman's forced compliance and a child's silent survival. The photograph now rests in the National Military Archives under the name Plate H23-D4, False Family, Real Survival. Its new display explains it clearly. Believed to be Daniel Reed, Civil War traitor, dressed in Union uniform, flanked by Lydia Harrow, believed hostage, and Elias Harrow, minor child. Photo used in attempt to manipulate Union officers into granting access behind field lines. Proven forgery, recovered and authenticated through archival cross-reference in 2025. Dr. Fiona Riles stood before the display during the unveiling. The press had shown up. So had James Harrow, Elias's great-grandson, after discovering the name online in the military archive. He stared long and hard at the boy in the photo. "My grandfather never knew this part of the story," James said softly. "He remembered a mother who loved him so much, and a man who terrified him. Then he ended up in the orphanage. He never knew he'd been a part of a ploy. Fiona turned to him. Elias survived because your great-great-grandmother refused to be part of that lie. She found a way to start over and protect her son, and now her truth gets to live above ground. A silent pause passed between them. James stepped forward and gently placed an item beneath the frame, a folded strip of red plaid cloth, cut from the heirloom dress passed down through 5 generations. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. That scrap of cloth said everything. The story, once shrouded in a false image, was now part of national record, not for the uniform, not for the man, but for the woman who endured it, and the boy who lived through it. And somehow, through the lies, the truth still made it out. Could this be a case of time manipulation, a photographic hoax far ahead of its era, or something else entirely? What do you think they really found hidden in that image? Let us know your thoughts below, and don't forget to stay tuned for more stories that challenge everything we thought we knew.